What's up, guys? Welcome back to Thin the Herd. It's your host, as always, Alex Gatlin, and with another episode for you. Again, just me this week. I think I'm going to be doing this for a while as my format. If you guys have been following my podcast, you know that for a minute there, I was having guests every week, and, you know, given the lack of being able to meet with a lot of people in person, I've been doing kind of solo episodes via quarantine, and I like it. I think I'm going to do this pretty regularly. But anyway, I want to jump into it. A lot going on this week. A lot I want to talk about, you know, and I try to keep these about 30 minutes each. So let's just jump into it. Man, wow. I don't know if it's just me or if it feels like the world is getting crazier, or the way we're just consuming stuff nonstop is just getting more and more intense. But the first thing I want to get into that, you know, I feel like has to be addressed, because it's just been, you know, really, really on top of a lot of things going on in the world right now, is the really horrible thing that happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, which I'm assuming a lot of people are aware of, but by chance, if you're not, maybe the worst example of, you know, I would say, I guess, police brutality is the right word. I don't even know what you would call it. But just to recap, in case anyone isn't aware, this gentleman, African-American gentleman named George Floyd, was being arrested for suspicion of forgery or something. Basically, ends up being killed by the police. Because this one officer, there were 4 officers involved, 3 were holding him down, 1 was kind of watching the crowd. And one of the officers in particular put his knee on the back of the guy's neck, and, you know, he died very slowly. And again, this is a really, I was about to say this is a tricky one. It's not tricky at all in the sense of, you know, this is pretty horrible. I mean, I'll say honestly, it's maybe the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. The worst, pretty hard to watch, pretty terrible to watch. And it's one of those things where you see this happen and it's almost like you ask yourself, like, how could this be? Like, how could all 4 police officers stand there and slowly watch this guy die and nobody do anything? And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this today, simply because I know it's been talked about. Even though it's happened only 2 days ago, it feels like it's been talked about, you know, at length by so many people, which I think is good. I think it's good that there's so much awareness raised about this. I think it's good that people are incredibly upset about it, myself included. And obviously, it's when I say it's good, I mean, obviously, this is one of the most horrible things that, you know, has ever occurred. What happened to this poor guy? But, you know, I hope, well, I will say this. I don't quite understand why charges haven't been brought against these officers yet. You know, I don't know the nuances of how that goes, like how the Justice Department goes about doing that. They were all fired pretty much immediately after this video was leaked, or posted, I guess is a better word. I don't want to use the word leaked, because it implies it was like, you know, something more nefarious. But it's really, you know, I consider myself to be pretty pro-police in the sense that, like, I have a lot of friends who are police officers. I think that in general, when there are incidents involved, I think also I feel like most police officers, I think from the ones that I know, are good people and try to do good. And unfortunately, this example, I mean, it's just so awful the way this all panned out and what happened. I mean, really, the way that this guy was killed, it was barbaric. I mean, it was like the way somebody would strangle an animal to death. And people are furious, rightfully so. I know there's been a lot of criticism against people rioting, or I don't want to use that word, protesting in Minneapolis and Los Angeles. I'll give you an example, right? Like, I saw people online, some commentators kind of coming at, you know, a lot of protesters in Los Angeles, because they were saying, well, why are people, you know, doing this in LA? It happened in Minneapolis, and why are they blocking traffic? And, you know, all I got to say to that is, if you don't, I'll just speak for myself. I have no idea what it's like to see someone who looks like myself be slowly killed, whether it was intentional or accidental. It doesn't matter. It was barbaric, right? On video, and it's just I don't often struggle for the right thing to say on this podcast. I feel like it's so hard to know what to say about this. Not that my opinion is even, necessary on this issue, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is anyone who feels similarly to me, where you have friends and people that you respect who are police, when you see something this awful, I completely understand why people feel like they have no options left, why they feel like there's nothing else to do other than, revolution against things like this, because it was just so, it really was the most horrible thing I've ever seen on video. I will say, I hope, again, I'm not an expert in anything legal related, obviously. I'll just say that I hope that justice is done very quickly and fairly against these officers, not only for the sake of George Floyd's family and loved ones, and make an example of corruption at the worst level when someone has that kind of power, but also just to hopefully restore some kind of trust the public has in institutions. With the police, I have to imagine. If the public doesn't feel like justice is done, it would be very, very difficult for people to trust police officers in the future. And again, I have a lot of respect for most cops who I think the majority of them are good, and this is just a really horrible example of the worst kind of police brutality. And it's the only good of this is that it seems like everyone across the board acknowledges how awful this was. Justice needs to happen immediately. And I hope some serious reforms come from this. I hope that, we don't see things like this again. Obviously, I'm sure, I don't know. It's just really unfortunate. And I guess it's a reminder that, I don't want to use the word thank God they were recording. I guess that's a way to phrase it, but like, it makes you wonder, like, without cameras, without video evidence, like how much more of this stuff has occurred that we don't know about. If the video wasn't so obvious, would the narrative be different? So anyway, I don't know. It's just really unfortunate, and I just wanted to make sure that I at least bring it to some awareness, even though I think it seems like most people understand what just occurred, and there's a discussion happening about it, and people much more qualified in the legal, ramifications of this are handling that. But yeah, it's just, it was really, really difficult to watch, and I just hope that some good comes from this long term, because it was tough. I'm not gonna lie, it was really, really tough to see that. Okay, well, anyway, and by the way, the last thing I'll say is, if anybody is like, by chance, I don't know how this could be, but if I'm the first person you're hearing about this from, please look up George Floyd, and look up, more importantly, also, not just like the video of the horrible thing that happened to him, but videos that his family has shared about what a wonderful man this guy was. He seemed like he really, was a great person and tried to do good in the world. Which I think we all need a little bit more of that right now. But anyway, to shift gears, what else I want to get into today? So the other big news is that more than ever, Trump is going to war against Twitter. Which, again, so Twitter, if you didn't know, if you haven't caught up on this, they've started instituting some sort of fact-checking measures against Trump. So basically what it is I guess, Trump's tweets that, and again, I try to stay politically neutral on a lot of this stuff, but Trump's tweets now are being fact checked by Twitter, which I guess is good in the sense that, like, not just for Trump. Well, I'll say a couple things. All right. As someone who's not a Trump supporter, I do not like Donald Trump. I don't think he's a good president. I don't think he's done any good to help unite the country, et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting. So Twitter now is doing like a fact checking system because of, the nature of what Trump has been doing. And I do wonder, so long term, I think this is the beginning of something of like kind of a new phase we're heading into, in a sense, because it does seem to really generalize that social media tends to skew with a more liberal angle. And they seem that in a lot of cases, at least by many people's accounts, that they are much more censoring of conservative leaning voices. Now, how true that is, that's a debate, but at least that seems to be kind of a big notion that goes on, right? A lot of people believe that narrative. And I do wonder if we're going to get to a point where we just have two different, like now what we basically have, right? It's like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, a few other social media platforms that aren't as big as the spreading information sphere, like TikTok, for example. But there's only a couple major powerhouses, and they all, to generalize, like I said, tend to skew left. I do wonder if it gets to a point where this kind of trend continues, where there's more fact checking involved and people who lean more conservative feel like they're being silenced, feel like they're, being shut down, if they're just going to build up their own social media platforms. And then we end up just having sort of like two, I guess, realities, if you will. We already have super polarized news, right? Where like CNN leans super left, Fox News leans super right, and then a lot of people tend to pick the one that they think is more trustworthy and kind of write off the other one as fiction or as, complete nonsense. I do wonder, like I said, not even wonder, I feel like that's coming. I feel like what's going to happen is that the loudest voices in different camps are going to keep doubling down on their stance. And we're going to end up having with like liberal Twitter and conservative Twitter. And the weird thing is, like, the people who, strictly adhere to that, it's almost like they're going to believe that, like, that's the only truth. You know what I mean? So, it seems like I don't know what the answer is, but it's like the crazier, like both sides get crazier and crazier, and there doesn't really seem to be a lot of room for, measured, rational thought on either end. Because, there's people who just right out the gate, Trump says something, they're a loyalist to him, or vice versa. Trump says something and he's the worst thing on earth, right? So I just wonder, like, I do feel like what I'm really worried about is come November, right? How, let's say Trump doesn't win and he goes online and, argues, and a lot of people have said this, oh, it was a rigged election, there were irregularities, blah, blah, blah. And then if social media, and so what's been happening now is Twitter's been, basically flagging a lot of his comments about mail-in voting fraud and things like that, saying it's not true. I don't know. I haven't been able to do my own research on that yet. But it's going to be interesting if we get to that point in November, not even interesting, more like terrifying. And then the people who are sort of in these like extremist, I don't want to use extremist camps, but the most radical voices on either end decide that, there's like nothing that can be trusted on the internet, and they just want to overthrow the whole system. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It does feel like there isn't really, it's almost like there isn't, like we're speaking two different languages at this point, right? So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this. And also, by the way, so I don't know if the president, so I guess he wants to do this new executive order that like puts on these new regulations on social media companies. Again, I don't quite understand what that means. And if he even has the power to do that. But what I do think we're going to see more and more of, I know I was kind of rambling a bit here, but I do think we're going to see more and more of people who feel very attached to their political ideologies. So I think this will end up birthing social media like separate, in the same way we have news outlets that skew left and skew right. I think we're going to start birthing more social media platforms that tend to skew left and skew right, and people, it's gonna be a very, very weird future, more so than it is now, when people sort of have, these new I don't know, like it's almost like you can just like mute out any opinion you don't want to see or hear, which seems very strange. The other thing I wanted to jump into, though, is I don't know if you guys have seen this, or if you're familiar with what deep fakes are, but I saw this article on Forbes that says deep fakes are going to wreak havoc on society and we are not prepared. And if you don't know what deep fakes are, basically a deep fake video is what a lot of them are. It is really the ability at this point, and if you have a second, just go and like YouTube deep fake examples, and they're pretty terrifying when you see them. But what they are is that basically now the technology that exists with AI, you can take video of anyone who has a lot of content of themselves on the internet, like myself, for example, right? Or someone way more prevalent than me. And at a certain point, it'll be everyone, because everyone's face and voice and likeness are all over the internet. You can take that and create completely fake videos, make them saying stuff that aren't true at all, that are completely inaccurate, and they look completely real. And the weird part of this, and a little bit telling of our society, where we are as a society, and sort of, I don't know, super creepy, is that this has been really, like a lot of technology, really blown up first in the porn industry, where people can take like a celebrity's face or even someone they know and superimpose it onto the body of a porn actor and make it look incredibly real. Now, on the one hand, that seems like a little bit like, it's silly and weird and who cares? Like, it's just pornography. People are weirdos. But the terrifying part is what this means for the future, in terms of how do we even authenticate anything anymore? I have kind of a weird obsession with technology, with how it's going to outpace us. And it does seem like it almost feels like the more content we have, the more technology we have, the harder it is to really keep up with anything. And I guess going back to my point on social media, I guess one of the things that I've realized that's really frustrating with Facebook is that, like, when you go on a news website, political biases aside, or whatever you want to feel about certain news outlets, when you go on a site like Fox News or CNN or NPR or whatever, at least the stories they're posting theoretically are in order of like what's happening now in the world. They make it where it's like, if this headline is on top of our page, then it's either something that's happening right now, happened very recently, or it's written in a way that explains we're looking at a trend from X time ago or what's coming up in the future. When people share stuff on Facebook, you never really know. You have to like click into the article and look at what's going on to know how relevant it is, to how recent it is, right? So I've noticed that people tend to share a lot of stuff with COVID and coronavirus, like spike here, numbers here, and then you click on the link and you realize like, this is from a month ago, and it's adding to so much, disinformation. And it's, again, it goes back to the thing where I feel like, I assume, not even assume, I think social media companies are, for the most part, trying to do good. I don't think a lot of them are actively trying to push an agenda as much as they're just trying to, well, I guess they are pushing an agenda, but I think they're trying more so to do what they genuinely think is right by blocking out what they believe is actually fake information, more so than being like, hey, These are the things that we like. I think they're more so trying to help just get truth out there rather than push a specific like political point. But you know, the more and more that we like, the more that everyone has access to just like throw information out at their leisure, the harder and harder it becomes to even have any grasp on like what is real, what is accurate information. And now with the deep fake video thing, it's almost like I think we're going to see a big spike in that early, and then we're going to have different ways to kind of, you know, validate or verify what videos are real and what are complete nonsense. But then at a certain point, it's just going to get to be, I think, even more ways that people distrust what they see, that everything is fake. So I don't know. I just hope that, you know, we are able, I mean, maybe in a certain way, it'll help us all just kind of, you know, check out, get off the grid. I know that like I'm on social media all the time, probably looking for content for topics to just discuss about on my 2 podcasts. And I'm sort of, I mean, I definitely do. It definitely does feel like for me, and I'm trying to get better about this, if you're not on it, keeping up with what's going on, you're blatantly just like keeping yourself uninformed. But at the same time, it just feels like, you know, there's only so much energy you can put into stuff. There's only so much information you can even stomach to process at a time. And fact check, and, you know, I don't know. It just seems like the more like with the deep fake video thing and Trump fighting Twitter. And again, I have no problem with Twitter fact checking stuff, but it just seems like the more we try to find ways to like process all this information, we just sort of keep on doubling down with exhausting ourselves and getting to the point where it's like, oh, I don't even, what's true, what's not, I don't know, man. I mean, you know. So anyway, the last thing I'll say, and I guess I'll leave it at that today. The mask thing. It does seem now we've gotten to the point where there's businesses that are both so pro-mask and so anti-mask that, well, I don't have a problem. I don't see any issue with businesses doing whatever they want, right? They're private business. They can do what they want, the same way that like there's, you know, those classic sayings, no shoes, no shirt, no service. You know, that a lot of businesses want to require people to wear masks. I don't see any issue with that. I get this. Some people find them to be an inconvenience, or some people claim that it's an infringement on their freedom, whatever. I don't hold that line of thinking. However, I've now seen there's a trend with some businesses forbidding people, let's say if you are not welcome inside if you're wearing a mask, which I guess, you know, they're a private business. They can do what they want. But it does seem like weird and just like a way to be like trolly against, you know, people who I guess skew more liberal. So I don't know. It just seems odd. I hope that trend doesn't continue. I understand if you don't want to require it, if you want to let people choose, that seems fine. But to forbid people from wearing masks, it just seems very childish and immature. And I don't know. I don't quite understand the intent behind it, other than to like provoke people and sort of just be, I don't know. It just seems weird. It seems super weird and just kind of gross. And again, I'm not saying that, listen, I don't, if I'm out in the world, I don't wear them. I'll wear a mask if I'm around people, if I'm going to be within 6 feet of you. I don't wear them when I exercise and stuff because I don't think it's necessary. It seems like if you're not within 6 feet of people in a closed space, it's not necessary. But it does seem odd, like the notion that any private business would prohibit it. You know, I don't. It just seems very unwise. But to kind of close things out here, I am still in Georgia, and I will say, being in Georgia, it's been a very good experience, and it definitely, as I've said many times, it reminds me that, you know, different people are experiencing everything today very differently based on where they are in the world. I know I have a lot of friends in Hollywood, back in LA, who things are very much locked down. And I do think the health risks there are much more severe. But, being here in Georgia, things feel okay. It feels honestly not bad. It feels, and it honestly gives me a lot of hope that we're heading in the right direction and things are going to pick up soon. It seems like, this virus, this disease, I think it's a virus. I don't think it's a disease. I don't quite know the difference, but that it wasn't quite as awful as we thought. And with just like kind of the right, basic precautions and measures, we can go back to most normal life and things will be okay. But I don't know, man. It's just I'm still really disturbed by that video of what happened at George Floyd. And there's so many people more qualified to talk about what happened than I am. But I guess just be nice to people, man. Everybody's going through a tough time this week or lately. And I don't know. I just hope we can all get through this coming out better people. Anyway, that's it this week. I'm gonna leave you guys with that. I'm gonna sign off here. Thanks for listening. I'll try to do another episode soon. Thanks.